Team Topology also helps organizations focus more tightly, if you like, on their core mission, with the idea of streams and limiting team cognitive load. So as I was saying before, often when I hear about monoliths in the software and technical monoliths, I always think that's probably more of a consequence than the cause, right? The causes of the monolith is probably didn't start on the technical side often. It starts on the business side, where we're tangling different concepts, which is kind of normal as the organization grows. If we're starting small and we're successful and we build more things and provide more services, then if we're not careful, there will likely be a lot of dependencies being built into the products that we're developing. And so we need to go back and try to understand what are actually the different concepts, the different customers that we're serving, so that we can decouple ourselves again. So what is business agility? From our point of view, if you like, is the ability to respond rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. So we're talking here about a timeline where we're talking about adapting in hours or even minutes, not weeks or months, right? So that's the speed is critical here, right? And I think for everyone is going to be almost a truism by now that speed is paramount for any organization to compete these days, right? And to adapt to things that are unexpected, like pandemics and other kind of events and changes in the market that were not expected. And so if we don't have this ability to respond rapidly, then we're going to be at a disadvantage as an organization or a business. And also, we need this business agility because likely if we can do those kind of rapid response, then that means we're probably going to be quite good at working in a remote first way, which is now, or a hybrid with strong remote component way, which most organizations are dealing with right now. So if we're agile, we'll probably have put in place the things that are needed to, also from a technical perspective, obviously things like continuous delivery, observability, telemetry, all these things to be able to respond rapidly, also from a technical perspective, are going to help with the remote first aspect. And like I said, being able to cope with the speed of change that's being requested. Whether that's because technology is changing all the time and we need to be able to leverage the new offerings, sometimes just to be able to compete in the hiring market. I just had a session with a client today where they said for us it's very important that the technology stack be as modern as possible, because that's the only way we can attract talent in our region to our organization. But obviously the technology itself provides value if adopted in a reasonable way. But other things that are happening, even climate, geopolitical changes that can have an impact these days. And obviously more and more competition, the barrier to entry on almost any industry these days, maybe not the military, but other than that, even finance, insurance, the barrier of entry is much lower than it has ever been, both from a technical perspective, where we have cloud, we have a lot of SaaS offerings that we can rely and get up to speed very quickly, as well as in terms of regulations, because of the increase in the number of startups, even in like fintech and other areas. Those things have been slowly being tackled, right? Which used to be a huge obstacle, now are not such a big obstacle anymore. They're not necessarily easy, but it's the entry is much easier than it used to be 10, 15 years ago. So if we're trying to achieve business agility, we should have a purpose as well. Why do we want business agility? And so it should help us answer some questions, right? So the idea of becoming more agile in terms of business and responding to change means that we'll be able to answer or have a better idea of how to answer, how do we optimize for a fast flow of change? How can we actually understand if we're going in the right direction in terms of improving flow? How do we make sure that we're focusing on user needs, right? So that's another key aspect. If we're very fast, we can deliver features, functionality very quickly, but we're not really helping the users. That's not going to be very valuable. That's not agile. It's fast, but it's not business agility as we understand it. And finally, should be able to answer, how do we course correct when things go wrong? So that relates to the ability to monitor and track how are we doing in terms of meeting customer needs and validating that what we're delivering actually helps the organization and helps customers, right? So business agility should be helping us course correct faster, identifying, well, we deployed this feature, we thought this was going to help increase retention of customers, for example, or increase the number of sales. And turns out that we have the data showing that actually the patterns have not changed, the behavior patterns of customers have not changed. So that kind of sensing and feedback is what we should be looking for, because we're not going to have the answers from the beginning on what's going to help the customers or what's going to help the organization do more business, right? We're going to run some experiments, we're going to try some things and see if we improve. But we need the mechanism to course correct, to get feedback and correct if we're not on the right track. So being agile is more than doing agile, right? It's more than following some framework and following ceremonies and saying we're agile. I think that's pretty clear by now, and maybe many of you have worked or work in organizations where you see the adoption of the ceremonies not really leading to much difference in terms of business agility, right? The good thing is we have a much bigger body of work where obviously include Team Topologies, but other books that have been really helpful for organizations to understand where do they need to focus. So Accelerate, for example, by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humboldt, Jean Kim, has become a major reference because it provides clues on what are the things that matter for high performance and for faster flow. In particular, the 4 key metrics that they talk about as being directly correlated to high-performing teams and organizations, which include lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and change fail percentage. So what Accelerate is really telling us, in a way, is that business agility is sort of supported by technical agility and practices that we can see a reflection of those in the improvement of these metrics. Okay, so these metrics are sort of an indicator that we're probably, if we're doing well on this, we're probably going to be very close to having more business agility. But there's still the whole part about how do we validate that we're actually meeting the customer needs, right? So that's maybe what's not in this picture, but definitely this is something we need to consider if we want to be have more business agility. So a little bit more on kind of a slightly more technical practices, some of the things that you need to improve on these 4 key metrics include obviously, having deployment pipelines that are a good representation and accurate representation of how do you get changes to production, right? What are all the kind of controls and all the steps that need to be in place to validate changes can go in production securely? We need other technical practices, like ideally you're using test-driven development, pair programming, mob programming, having rich telemetry from your running services so that you can get that feedback on how are the patterns of usage of my service changing? Do I have problems with reliability of my service? All those things that help us then course correct. All of these things we should be adopting if we want to have business agility, right? They're not sort of independent things. These technical practices help us become better at business agility. And then from a team perspective, obviously having more ownership, more autonomy and purpose around the service that we provide, right? We know that teams with end-to-end ownership of their service that can actually quickly go and take an idea or a request from a customer and actually go through the whole process of how do we implement this idea, how do we validate, and then actually doing the coding, the testing, deployment, and monitoring how this is doing in production. That's the fastest flow you can have if you have this sort of ownership end-to-end within the team. But that means we need to be careful of how we break up large products and systems into smaller parts that make sense. The kind of streams that we talk about in Team Topologies. We need basic things, like configuration in version control and basically everything in version control. It still needs to be said. Some organizations still don't do this, other than just the application code. We need more and more to be cloud native. Again, this client today was saying that all their investment needs to be cloud native, because otherwise they can't keep up with the competitors in terms of hiring and having technology that really moves the needle. So cloud native helps us because we have a whole lot of technology and tools that are helpful to so that we don't have to build internally. We can rely on the landscape that exists, and it provides good practices on operability, observability, telemetry, etc., monitoring, etc. And most of the cloud native, I should say, cloud native is by definition programmable and designed for automation, right? So that's going to help us achieve faster flow by automating a lot of the work that used to be done manually by teams. And we need to think about the architecture, right? So as I mentioned before, if we want teams that are more loosely coupled between them, because we know they can go faster, each of the teams can go faster, we probably have to realign or rethink our architecture if we have some sort of monolith. And not necessarily that we need to migrate to microservices or something like that. It can be an option, but actually thinking about the teams first. How do we identify what are actually the different business concepts and business customers we're serving with this large product or system, and what do we need to do to actually have more clarity on different parts of the system that can be owned by different teams that are more independent. It's not easy. I'm not going to say this is easy to do, but it's something that if we really want business agility, we're going to have to deal with this for any kind of organization that is not a startup that has been around for some time. Typically, we need to look into this. So you can use things like domain-driven design, which really at the core is really untangling business domains and business concepts, which help with faster flow. It's also understanding what are our core domains, what are the things we should be investing in versus what are the other kind of commodity domains that we should be more relying on external parties or external services to help us with, and it's not our core mission. But essentially, it helps us identify what are here the different business aspects at play that we need to separate. Wordly maps, they help us increase situational awareness, as I was saying before, and apply the right techniques and think about what is the landscape today of what we offer to customers and what we use internally, and what how should this move along, the timeline? What are the things that we should productize? What are the things that we should rely on, utility and commodity to actually not have to deal with, not have to spend effort internally? And what are the things that are sort of new and are custom and that we're still discovering what is the value and how do we make this work? So I'm not going to go into a lot more detail on Wordly maps. Obviously, I recommend having a look if you're not familiar. But Wordly maps and Team Topologies is something that is being explored by some people like Susan Kaiser. She has some great talks about that, and she's writing a book also about that.
Sorry, Manuel.
Yeah.
Just sorry for interrupting you, but we have a question. Do you prefer the question now or at the end?
I'll prefer at the end. Make sure
Okay,
I can go through the presentation.
Please go ahead.
All right. Yeah, make sure to write the questions in the chat, and then so you don't forget, and then we can get to them at the end. And then obviously Team Topologies around fast flow and rapid feedback. What are the kind of team types interactions that we can use to achieve faster flow and to achieve more business agility? So Team Topologies really, not necessarily every organization will benefit, but any organization that wants to move faster and meet customer needs faster and and solve customer problems faster can take something from Team Topologies. So what we're talking about is having a rapid flow of change, so we can get change out into production, into our systems quickly, but also then validating those changes, understanding if they're actually helping the business and helping customers. So it's not just delivering faster, it's also getting rapid feedback from running systems, right? So what we're trying with Team Topologies is move away from handovers, right? In very traditional way of developing and running software, we had all these different teams with kind of very constrained responsibilities. We just do testing or we just do development, etc. The more handovers we have, the more wait times, the more information loss is happening. And so all of those things make it slower to get changes to customers and make it slower and more difficult to get feedback back to the teams that were creating and making the changes. So instead, we talk about streamlined teams. Very briefly, these are the kind of teams with end-to-end ownership, right? If the work never leaves this streamlined team, that's going to be the fastest way to get changes to customers. So we have a team that's able to take, customer requests or ideas from the business and getting those changes to actually, find a solution, implementation, get them out in production, and then get the feedback and iterate on that on the next version of the service or the next changes to the service. This is kind of the starting point for Team Topologies, that ideally we would like to have decoupling of the architecture and business concepts in a way that allows mostly streamlined teams to work in this end-to-end way with a fair amount of self-sufficiency and only loose coupling with other teams. But then we need other types of teams as well, because to achieve this is quite demanding. You need a lot of skills in modern software and technology stacks to be able to do this, right? To build and run your service, as well as understand the business domain much more deeply than what we've seen in the past. So these teams are going to need help, and that's where the other topologies come in. So we have enabling teams, usually a team of experts on some domain. So they're helping essentially teach and mentor the streamlined team so that they gain some skills that they're probably lacking. Depending on the organization, can be anything from test automation to user experience or product development or operations. Anything that the team needs to do that they don't have the skills yet can be helped by an enabling team on that domain. We have platform teams where we have essentially internal products that help the streamlined teams do things which can be anything from CI/CD to monitoring to deployments, but also other more kind of business related internal products can be in the platform as well. Complicated subsystems are kind of an exception where we want to avoid that, but sometimes there are some really niche, high skill demand parts of a system that require a dedicated team. But we need to be careful and try to avoid that if you can, because they can become a bottleneck if many streamlined teams depend on the complicated subsystem. And then we talk about interaction modes between teams. So like I said, we want teams to be as loosely coupled as possible, but it doesn't mean that we have the ideal that they never depend on each other. But if we clarify what kind of interactions should happen between teams when they have dependencies or things they need to work out together, that helps us kind of frame those interactions. So you might have collaboration, two teams working together to solve some problem or define, some solution together. X as a service is very much like infrastructure as a service or software as a service, where one team provides a set of functionality and reliability, etc., as a service to other teams to consume. And facilitating is typical for enabling teams, where they are facilitating the other teams learning around some domain, right? So this can take shape in the form of some internal workshops or pairing with the other team to kind of explain, how do we use this tool, or what are some good practices in this domain, etc. So with this kind of organizational tools, if you like, the team types and interaction modes, we can start having this sort of picture that I was talking about earlier. We can obviously for a small part of the organization, but we can see a sort of snapshot, right? We can see that we have two streamlined teams. We can understand what are they're providing to our end customers. We see there's a platform team. What are the services provided by the platform team? There's an enabling team, etc. And we can see also how are they interacting. So we see enabling team is facilitating a streamlined team around some domain, maybe user experience or test automation or compliance or anything like that. But it gives us sort of a view on where we are now organizationally and what do we need to do next. What are the gaps that we have or the things we want to do that maybe this needs to change slightly, right? Maybe we need another streamlined team. Maybe we need to decouple some streams of work and we need another team for that, or we need some new service in the platform and we need the platform team to collaborate with the streamlined team, etc. Importantly, we want to track the dependencies. Like I said, it's not that teams don't have any dependency anymore or that we are trying to achieve that. There are dependencies. What we want to do is move away from blocking dependencies to non-blocking. So what do I mean by this? When you have blocking, it basically means we're having handovers and we're having wait times. It means maybe we're doing some development and now we have to ask let's say, a security team to open some ports on the firewall or something like that, or some infrastructure to be created. And so we have to stop as a team and wait for another team to do this for us. That's a blocking dependency, right? We're blocked. We have to stop. Even if we work in parallel on something else, but the initial feature or change that we're trying to deliver is blocked. And non-blocking means we're strongly relying on self-service, right? So we might have platform services that teams can consume in a self-service way. It can be a running service that we use for monitoring, or it can be a library that we integrate in our system. But things that we can rely on without depending on another team to execute some work for us. So like I said, we should be tracking what dependencies we have as a team on other teams, right? And which ones are blocking, which ones are not blocking, so we can deal with the blocking ones and see what can we do to remove this blocking dependency. In general, we want to remove barriers to flow in terms of handoffs or approval gates. If there's some entity in the organization that has to approve certain changes? How can we move into those controls in a way that is more automated, that is more API driven, ideally in a self-service way? And so one of the things that often is needed if we want more business agility is to have a shift around compliance mindset, that stop being gatekeepers, seeing compliance as gatekeeping to changes to our systems and services, and actually more of an enabling role. Like, how do we enable streamline teams to do the changes and be compliant at the same time without having to have those gates and those kind of wait times that we're used to. So this shift is not easy. It's requires time, obviously, and understanding of why we're doing this and why this is important for the organization, why business agility is important. And in general, what we're looking is, how do we scale the expertise in the organization, right? In the sense of, how do we move from teams that are experts but are sort of bottlenecks because they're the only ones who can do this, compliance, security, etc., to enabling mindset where we actually scale the expertise across the organization. And that's where enabling teams and platform teams come in, and possibly complicated subsystem teams. So what we need to do to be compliant with whatever regulations apply to our organization, but still have multiple decoupled rapid flows of change that are owned by mostly independent teams or more autonomous teams. And that's, like I said, where we might want to start looking as domain experts, as enablers for compliance and governance, together with what do we need to have in the platform that supports this compliance, these controls that we need to have. So in this section, we're going to see as why the product mindset is so important as well for business agility. So business agility usually means we want to provide products and services to our customers and adapt and evolve them quickly, right? Based on what the feedback we get and new requests that we get, or how we see the market evolving. So we need to have this product mindset. If we have kind of traditional project mindset, then we're probably focusing too much on the tasks and the what rather than why. Why are we doing this, and how do we have more visibility on, are we actually delivering the product and the services that customers need, versus are we meeting the deadlines, right? So product, it's good to define it. So Marty Kagan is one of the leading kind of people talking about product development and product teams, etc. He wrote a few books called Inspired, Empowered, where he mentions Team Topologies as well. So he defines a product as a holistic user experience, right? It's not just a set of functionality, but also the design around it, how we monetize it, and what kind of content it provides. So I think this is important to understand. So a product is not just a set of features, and therefore is not just about getting features out faster. It's actually, how is the product in helping the customers engage and helping the customers do the jobs they need to do, and at the same time benefit our organization, our business. So product is by definition optional, right? If I go in a shoe store, I don't have to buy any of them, or I don't have to buy what the assistant tells me I should buy, right? So it's always optional. No one is forced to use the product. That's how we think about products for end customers, right? A product should be carefully designed and curated. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be attractive to customers, not going to be making life easier for the customers if we don't think about how should it be designed and how does this help the customers. And obviously, it needs to simplify something for users. So I quite like this example where it couldn't be much simpler than this, right? Where in the old days, people would put a quarter and select the song they want to play. They don't need to know how to put the vinyl on the record player or anything like that. The machine did that for them. We simplified the task of, choose a song that you want to play, that you want to listen. So the product should always be simplifying something, some task, some workflow for users. The product should evolve to take advantage of technology as well, right? So we know that this is a constant evolution. So if we don't take advantage, we're going to be behind. And we need to focus on the user needs. That's what's going to drive a good experience for our customers, right? So obviously, I'm thinking about this internally as well, right? We need good experience of using software internally as well, not just for the end user. Obviously, we start with the end users, with our customers, but internally, we also want a good experience for developers, a good experience for testers, for operators, and whoever has to deal with the software or has to interact with the software. And it should, as much as possible, get out of the way, not increase the cognitive load of the users, making it harder to understand how to use the software, but actually making it easier. So we need to always design for usability. And here comes an interesting or another mindset shift, which is thinking about product management for internal platforms or products, if you like. Why should it be any different for internal platforms and products from how we think about products for customers? It should be optional as well. If we force internal teams to use certain tools and certain services that they might have a better option with a third party outside, then we're not getting buy-in. We're just getting, there's no adoption. It's just a mandate for teams to use this service, even if it might not really be helping them. So that's not helping us with business agility at the end of the day. So a platform should be optional to use. We shouldn't force teams to use it. And that means and some effort in the platform teams to advocate for the platform as a product idea, and also market. What are we offering as a platform? Why should teams use it? How does it help them do their work more efficiently? And so we need to have this product mindset inside the platform teams, using techniques like user personas or empathy maps and things that are familiar to user experience people. We need to bring that into the internal platforms as well. A good platform is going to be a curated experience for engineers, the customers of the platform, meaning we help our customers of the platform do their jobs easier, in a more engaging way, in a simpler way, that really then helps them or those teams go faster because they have less to worry about. They have less cognitive load. So I'm going to end with one example that I find quite interesting of applying team topologies and other things. Actually, in the book, in the Team Topologies book, we had a number of case studies which were about specific patterns, right? Because the book didn't exist at the time, but we saw specific patterns applied in companies like Adidas, IBM, etc. Around enabling, around platform teams, what makes a successful platform team, an internal platform. And now we're in October 2021. It's been 25 months. I think we've passed the 30,000 copies sold of the book. And we're, from the requests we get for help, we're starting to see sort of mainstream, if you like, adoption. We're starting to see large banks being interested, telecom, insurance, all these kind of more traditional industries, or used to be at least. And partially is because we're starting to see the good examples and the case studies coming out from a bit smaller organizations that have been able to apply the ideas of team topologies more broadly. Obviously, a large bank or telecom is going to take time to actually get the ideas and changes kind of widespread. but we're seeing pockets of adoption where it's been really helpful. And also one of the things that has been over and over people have told us is now they have a language to talk about the organization. They have a language and a vocabulary to talk about the problems that teams have, the lack of clarity on the team purpose and around interactions between teams and how to evolve the team structures, etc. So that's been quite rewarding for us. And so what we've done is, since the book came out, we've published new case studies, new examples on our website on teamtopologies.com. So if you go there, you'll see a number of different organizations. We've worked, me and Matthew, with different clients across different industries, from government to technology companies, but also in other areas. So it's basically the patterns apply regardless of the industry, right? It's the issue is often that mindset shift around certain aspects that are so ingrained in the way that organizations think about them that it's hard to think and to move away to kind of a faster flow approach, at least in large organizations. So briefly, this case study or these examples from Food Asylum. So for people in the UK, which I believe most of the people here, you're probably familiar with them. It's a reasonably sized organization, 2,500 employees, more or less. And they've been around for quite a long time, more than 15 years. And one of the things they realized in 2019, so just before the book came out, they had very fragmented work and teams and focus. So this is sort of how it looked like at the time, with kind of still quite a common split between product and engineering. And then within engineering, some teams you can see here are sort of aligned to some sort of service. Other teams are kind of just generically development teams or R&D teams. So you can see there's a kind of mix and match of responsibilities, types of teams are not super clear. And so they were struggling to get any kind of non-trivial change done. They had to have a lot of coordination between teams and product managers, etc. And so they saw Team Topologies. I think they first saw us talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit, and they said, okay, this makes sense. We need to align and understand what are the business streams of value to customer, right? And that's what they did. And they also kind of moved what they had sort of shared services team. They moved into a platform as a product approach. And it's interesting because one of the things they said as the key benefits was for the product managers, not necessarily for the technology teams by themselves, but the product managers had a much better view on which teams exist, what kind of interactions should happen between these teams if we want to get certain work done, right? So it, as you can read here, they said product managers from each team took special interest in team interaction types because it helped them have useful, directed conversations about upcoming work and basically fact check their different roadmaps and make sure interactions required were lined up in advance. So again, they didn't assume from this picture that all these streamlined teams, these 4 yellow streamlined teams, are fully independent. What they said is they're mostly independent, but there will be dependencies which we need to deal with. We need to understand what kind of interactions need to take place and when to validate that we'll be able to deliver the work that we want to deliver. Other things that they did, interestingly, like I said, they moved from a services team, which was mostly kind of a grouping of shared services, to a platform where we actually have an understanding of who are internal customers, what are their frustrations, what do they need to accelerate and reduce cognitive load. They also did combination of team topologies with wordly mapping that I mentioned earlier. So if you're not familiar yet with wordly mapping, this is sort of how it might look like. So you can see at the bottom, at the end in the axis here, that there's sort of evolution of products and systems from custom to product to commodity, and based on what is the current view on a system or service, you might need different teams. So you might have a streamlined team early on that is kind of doing the customization and the productization of some service, and maybe at some point it can become part of a platform, for example. They also adopted this idea we talk about in the book of the thinnest viable platform. So the internal platform should really be as thin as possible. We don't want to rebuild what already exists in other that's provided by other companies, right? We want to reuse. And the power of the internal platform is understanding the internal context. So then we can provide better abstractions, ideally with very thin wrapper around what third parties provide. And they had one really interesting example where they said, we need, what you see here is a simple configuration file that provides information on the location and which stores exist for Food Asylum. And the platform team thought, well, we need a database and we need to have a running service on top of it and front end, etc. And when they thought about it, actually, what if we just have a version data file that can be easily retrieve the data by the stream teams? And turned out that was basically enough, because this data doesn't change very often. The shops don't usually change. So they didn't really need to have a full-blown service on top of this. So it's a good example of this almost think about the minimum viable platform, or as we call it, thinnest viable platform. And they said that the Team Topologies help them have much more clarity on what types of teams we have, what are the mission of the teams, because they're aligned to these types of teams. So they use these different ideas of stream alignment, thinnest viable platform, evolving teams interactions over time, and worldly mapping. And the kind of, like I said, the key results that they said were helpful was this product management, power to understand much better what are the interactions between teams that are going to be needed, and how do we check that we can deliver what we're trying to deliver, obviously in a quick time frame, right? That we can do that faster. It also helped clarify communications during the pandemic, and teams just feel more responsive and more autonomous. So they said the interaction types gave them insight on how to promote good cross-team collaboration with specific purpose for the collaboration, so that teams are not just kind of depending on many different teams, but when we do depend on another team, or we need to come together to find a solution, and then we can become more decoupled again, that's when the interactions make sense. So Paul Martin and Andy Norton, who is actually no longer at Food Asylum, they helped write the case study that's available on our website, and thanks to them. And so very briefly, sort of to sum up, we looked at this 4 kind of sections. And so Team Topologies and the idea, the idea of business agility really should be about how to respond rapidly to changing external and internal conditions, like we've seen. Being agile is more than following the ceremonies, is, from our point of view, is having situational awareness, clarity of business purpose, having good technical practices, and promoting, empowering localized decisions, because we thought about how to decouple teams and how to have clear kind of streams of value for the business. We looked at the importance of product mindset in order to focus on user needs and user experience. Understand kind of the viability of different products, what is the mission of the product teams, etc., and how this applies internally to platforms as well. And then we looked at an example that combines some of these ideas and worldly mapping, and which is quite interesting, because obviously at the end of the day, it's not just Team Topologies that's going to help. It's having this combination of worldly mapping, domain-driven design, perhaps Team Topologies, depending on where the organization is today, but all those things can help. So I'm almost at the end. So briefly, what's next for Team Topologies? We have a workbook coming out soon, should be out in January. So it's essentially taking some of the ideas from Team Topologies and kind of giving some examples and kind of some more practical ways of thinking about these ideas in a remote first context with remote interactions, which is obviously an area of concern and interest for a lot of organizations. There are a number of free resources on our website around for learning and some simple, useful tools to do some of these things like dependency tracking, etc. And we have some infographics that are helpful to kind of share the ideas with people who are not familiar with the book yet. So check those out if you want to learn more. We also have an academy for online self-paced training. We have 2 courses. One is Team Topologies Distilled, kind of 3-hour version of the book, if you like, with some added extra insights since the book came out. And just last Friday, we released a new platform as a product course, which goes into much more depth around the things that I talked a little bit about today, why we should think about internal platform as a product. Why is that helpful? I'm at the end of the presentation. I hope it was useful. I had said I was supposed to finish in a minute or 2, but I'm happy to stay 5-10 more minutes for questions if there are questions people want to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Manuel. Thanks a lot for this presentation, so full of insights. There is one question from me that actually is from the community. Is it possible to have a copy of the deck that you share?
Sure, I will. I'll send it to you if you want to share on the meetup, and I usually put it on SlideShare and I post it on social media. Yeah.
Great. So we have just a few questions in the chat. The first one from Francisco Ortega. Francisco, you can unmute, tell where are you calling from, and make your question to Manuel.
Hi, Manuel. Thank you for the presentation. So Francisco from Brussels. My main question was because we have teams that are backend teams, and I was wondering how we can empower them to get ownership if there is always another layer in the structure today that we need in order to be able to put our things outside.
Yeah, that's a good question, and kind of seeing 2 different ways where organizations try to empower teams. One is kind of a bit naive, where saying, well, teams now can make all decisions by themselves, but then they don't have sort of the support system around them to actually help them learn and help them use a good platform to do their work. But what I would say, and what I would start with, is with the teams themselves. Often teams don't have clarity on what is their mission, who are their customers, even teams that are working on external end customer products. So a nice thing is that you can, as a team, start discussing this internally, even without any kind of changes from management or whatever. You can just discuss internally, what is our mission? What do we provide to customers? Do we understand who are our customers? Who are our kind of true customers that we should be serving? What are the skills that maybe we're missing to become more end-to-end and have more ownership of our service? And then with that kind of reflection, you can then start to promote outside the team and say, look, we think this is what needs to change. And also a team can start to track their dependencies on other teams and start seeing where can we become more empowered by reducing our dependencies on other teams, right? Obviously, there are some things where there might be mandated or processes that they have to follow that they cannot change by themselves. But sometimes there are places where we can collaborate with the other team and say, why don't we, instead of every month we depend on you to deploy our code, why don't we kind of learn a little bit about automated deployments, or I don't know what we need to do to be able to do that ourselves, just to give an example. So there is obviously some changes that need management input and validation, but I think each team can also start looking at how do we align to the topologies, if that makes sense, and how do we have more clarity internally on our mission, our customers, and reducing dependencies on other teams.
Thank you, Manuel. Next question from Mark Betty. Please unmute. Where are you calling from? And make your question.
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation, Manuel. We've been in touch on LinkedIn actually, and the question I posted, perhaps I worded it wrong, and I may be overthinking this, but my main takeaway from reading the book is that how can you apply, or even do you need to apply the ideas and principles in, say, for example, a startup or an environment with a very small technical department? So the work still exists that's stream-aligned or complicated subsystem platform, etc. But is there anything specific in, you know, a very small department to kind of lay the foundation to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think so. We're talking about a sort of ecosystem of teams or team of teams, right? With the stream aligned, which is what you usually have in a small, in a startup, usually are focused 100% on what is the product that we're building and how do we validate that there's a business case around this product or service. But I think platform and enabling thinking can happen even at a small startup. So maybe you don't have dedicated teams because you don't have enough people for that. But usually, and we give the example in the book, your platform can be very simple. It can be, in a startup example, it might be just a wiki page where we say, you know, we're using AWS for infrastructure, and these are the services that we use, and here's a default configuration that makes sense for our current situation. And so that alone can be a sort of minimal platform that helps, you know, if we have 2, 3, 4 teams, understand how do we make use of AWS without having to learn all the details. So the platform thinking can apply even if we don't have a dedicated team, and the same for enabling, where maybe as we grow as a startup into a scale up, or as we have more people, maybe some of the more experienced people can become sort of enablers, maybe not 100% of the time, but they can do some enabling work. If we have people with less experience, maybe the more senior can help them understand, you know, why do we have this system architecture? Why do we follow these practices, these technical practices? Or what kind of customers do we have? What kind of business are we trying to build? How all these things that, as the organization grows, start to become not leveled across everyone, right? Some people have more knowledge than others. So the enabling approach can work there as well, even if we don't have a dedicated enabling team.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was basically overthinking it, but no, that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. Before passing to Sergey for the last question, I was just to remind you that on the 2nd of November, we will have our next event with Zeina Zeitouni, connecting from US. And we will continue this conversation about product management, particularly focusing on MVP and how can we do MVP also in our large organization that normally hates MVP. Please, Sergey, if you can do your question, you make your question.
Thank you, Corrado. Thank you, Manuel. A very nice presentation. I like very much your book. It's a great book, I think. I liked your approach to have platform as a product, non-mandatory, concurrence, etc. But I cannot imagine it in, for example, banking environment, security, core banking, etc. Could you share your experience how it can be implemented?
Yeah, so it's hard to go into those details with the talk, but something we talk about in this new course in the academy is effectively it's more of a spectrum, right? So when we're saying platform is optional to use as a product. Obviously, there are differences between the services. So, for example, if we provide a CI/CD service in the platform, that is something that should be optional, where a team should have the option to say, okay, what the platform provides is not a good fit, and we're going to use this SaaS offering for our CI/CD pipeline. Maybe we have to deal with all the security aspects ourselves because we're going outside the platform. But if we have a valid use case and a valid reason to do that, so that we can be more agile as a team and deliver faster, then that can make sense. Then there are other services that could be part of a platform where it's harder to have options, right? When we're talking about user authentication, we're talking about some aspects of security, maybe not all. Sometimes there are things that we can have more options than we usually have. But anyway, it's sort of a spectrum, like things that is very hard to make optional because of their nature, but there's a lot that then there's options because there's offerings out there that can possibly be a better fit for different teams. So it's more of a spectrum, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you all for joining. I know I really appreciate, Manuel, that you gave more time than as expected. So thank you very much. It was really
You're welcome. Thank you.
Again, do not forget, if you have it, you have to read it. I'm saying that because I saw a couple of comments in the chat, the people that have this book actually, but they're still waiting for reading. So I hope to see you soon in our next events. And thank you again, Manuel. I hope to have you again as a guest. It would be amazing for us. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
Thanks for organizing. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.